My name's Captain Mark Slade. I've been in Afta now for 8 years. Started here teaching ATPLs, PPLs, and I'm now the head of MCC and Chief MCCI instructor. I've been flying for just over 20 years. I started my flying here in Cork. I started with Ryanair, was my first commercial job, and started flying about 20 years ago. I initially worked for a helicopter company on the Kinsale gas rigs and then became a flight instructor, and I've been in Afta now for the past 8 years. Afta have prepared their graduates for line operations by extensively working with our airline partners. We've worked back from APS MCC, integrating airline operations back into the earliest parts of flying, so students are exposed at the earliest stages of their training to the concepts of airline procedures, the concepts of checklists. Even though they are working a single crew initially, we're still introducing all the way through their training these aspects of airline operations. One of the big things we're trying to teach here on the APS MCC is now developing the multi-crew skills for our students. As we mentioned before, they've been flying single pilot up to now, obviously with their instructor. Now they've got to get into the concept of multi-crew and pilot flying, pilot monitoring, where you've got very specific roles that are laid out by your airline SOPs. So they've got to get into the way of thinking, not only do I now have to fly the airplane, but sometimes I might have to monitor the airplane in the other seat. And you've got very specific roles as to how that's done. So that's one of the big things that students have to cope with when they come to the course, is getting their head around what do I do and what I don't do. And mutual supervision is a huge part of it. It comes under what are called the core competencies. They're mentioned, and it says things like leadership has to be shown, decision making, awareness of the environment, aircraft, operating, handling considerations. All these things come under what are called the core competencies. And the difference between standard MCC JOC and APS MCC, apart from the duration of the course, the APS MCC obviously being about 4 weeks, the MCC JOC being 2 weeks, we do go into much more depth from the ground school point of view. We look more at specific procedures for airlines, we look at their flight plans, we analyse fuel, we start to think about the cabin crew, the effect on the passengers as well of weather, delays. Time management is very important, like for an airline, to maximise their profit, to keep the customers happy. So we have to teach them all about maximising their time management to get an airplane from A to B. And we have to emphasise this to the students as well. It's not just about flying the airplane, it's actually flying the airplane, doing it safely, getting it from A to B within the time constraints that are laid down by your company, but doing it all within a degree of safety and professionally as well. So the big difference really between APS MCC and MCC JOC is you get a much more rounded view of airline operations through the APS MCC. 50% of people that go for airline assessment with an MCC JOC on average fail on their first assessment with just the basic MCC JOC. If you've got an APS MCC behind you, Afta's current record is 98% pass rate with APS MCC behind you. So the benefits of just those extra couple of weeks and the extra training are huge. Also, when we're doing the APS MCC, something that we don't do in the MCC JOC is PBN. This is performance-based navigation. This gets introduced in their ground school studies during ATPL. It's part of radio navigation. They learn about performance-based navigation, which is now moving away from the old way of navigation where we used to navigate from fixed beacons on the ground and the airplane was able to home to them and navigate from them. Nowadays, with the advent of space technology, it's all being moved over to satellite waypoints. So we're now able to operate, half of our fleet, as I'm sure you'll find out, is able to operate using these performance-based approaches, same as our 737 here. This is where all the airlines are going, and we're doing approaches based on satellite waypoints. So we can come down to 200 feet above the airport purely based on satellite waypoints. And this is the new stuff. This is where the future is going with approach technology. So we're right at the cutting edge of that in our training at the moment. One of the big advantages we've seen of doing the APS MCC is the quality of student we are actually producing at the end. Over the 2 years that we've had APS MCC introduced here, we have had a huge increase in the quality of students being produced, the handling, their mutual supervision of each other on the flight deck, and it just stands with us. Like, our airline partners have seen that as well. We've got good feedback from them that they've seen a good improvement in students with the APS MCC. One of the big advantages of using our 737 for the handling is it's much more a manual aircraft. There is no specific rules that say you have to do it on any particular type of airplane. So you could do it on an Airbus or a very highly automated airplane, but you don't get the advantage of the handling. With the APS MCC, the initial sessions are divided up into really getting used to handling a big jet in normal flight and non-normal conditions. Then in the mid to later sessions, we then emphasize airline operations, getting your passengers from A to B, communication with the cabin crew, communication with ATC, your company. So it's really about honing those flying skills and putting it together with all the airline operations, which you don't get in a basic MCC jock. APS MCC we introduced it here 2 years ago in Afta. It came about, EASA, who are the regulation board for Europe, they did an audit of European airlines a few years ago, and they found that most students that were going onto the line, onto their first large airplane, 95% were passing their type rate successfully, but only 50% really had adequate knowledge of systems, procedures that the airline actually wanted. So it's on the back of that APS MCC was invented to, at the early stage, give students more of an exposure to what's expected of them in the airline. So when they leave here, they are more of a finished product for the airline to work with. The structure of the APS MCC is initially 4 days of ground school, covering everything from basics of CRM, threat and error management, to our SOPs, airline SOPs, use of the electronic flight bag, use of non-normal checklists, normal checklists, basically getting them ready for the course. They then have approximately about a week to study. They then sit 4 ground school exams just to check they are at an adequate level to come into the simulator. Once they've done their exams, we then have 2 days of what's called cockpit procedures training, where they learn to set up the aircraft, taxi the airplane, shut it down. 2 days of pure ground procedures. So when they come to the actual flying, of which there are 10 days of actual flying sessions, they're not wasting time on the ground. They know how to start the thing up, get it moving, get it into the air. Then we can develop the actual handling skills, as we've mentioned before, then going into more detail with airline SOPs. So the APS course is divided up into technical skills and non-technical skills. The technical skills are flying the airplane, preparing your paperwork, the actual physical elements of handling the airplane, preparing it. But equally important are what are called the non-technical skills. These are really big on EASA's radar at the moment. If you look back to human factors training, which our students learn at the early stages, 70% of fatal accidents in big airliners are caused by human factors, not technical issues with the aircraft. So anything we can do to reduce those human errors and factors that cause incidents and accidents, the better prepared we will be. And these non-technical skills are leadership, communication, decision-making, personal skills and attitude, and team skills. So the non-technical skills are equally as important as being able to actually manually fly an airplane, and this is something that we emphasize an awful lot all the way through students training, not just at the APS stage. And again, this does give us an edge when it comes to training students for the airline world. They definitely have a more rounded experience of what is expected after coming through Afta here. When the students come on the APS MCC course, they're going to get a wide variety of experience from our instructors. All of our instructors are either ex-airline or currently flying for airline companies, so they can actually bring real-world experience to our students, which is highly beneficial. Here at Afta, our students are experiencing international traffic at Cork Airport. They're flying on a busy airport. They're flying to and from Cork, Shannon, into Waterford. So they're experiencing light aircraft, they're experiencing heavy traffic as well. They're having to interact with ATC on a professional level as well. The benefits of operating out of Cork are, apart from being an international airport, we've got a good relationship with ATC. The weather in Cork, even though it is challenging, it provides our students with excellent opportunities for learning and handling the aircraft. So while students are here at Afta, as well as having access to our modern fleet, G1000 Cessnas, Diamond and Seneca aircraft, we've got a variety of simulators. We have some DA42 simulators that are based up at the airport for when students are doing their multi-IR. We also have our Boeing 737 simulator here in Little Island. So when the students get experience flying the Boeing 737 here, it's one of the most widely used aircraft in the world for medium-range jets. So for students to learn to handle the 737 at this level is going to give them a big advantage when it comes to job hunting and that first experience in the right-hand seat commercially.
Hi, my name is Captain Jerry Humphreys. I am the Deputy Head of Training at Atlantic Flight Training Academy in Cork. And I did a degree in aeronautical engineering, and then I joined the Royal Air Force and flew Harriers for almost 20 years. Having left the Royal Air Force, I went into commercial flying and I flew a business airplane for about 10 years, single pilot, IFR stuff around Europe. Yes, I've been the Deputy Head of Training here for 5 years or so, and I really believe in Afta, so much so in fact that my son came through here and he learned to fly with us and went through the system and has been flying in a commercial aircraft now for 5 years and is very happy indeed. Our UPRT syllabus has been designed in close cooperation with our APS MCC guys and our head of training, who himself is an extremely experienced airline pilot. And it's part of an ICAO initiative to reduce the instances of loss of control in flight leading to fatal accidents. What we do in Afta is we fill the gap between theory and what happens in simulators. Obviously, APS MCC and people on their type rating will be doing upset prevention recovery training in sims. We do in-airplane upset prevention recovery training because sims don't do G. Simulators are wonderful for simulating systems problems or for getting people used to procedures, but the one thing that sims don't do is G. And so what we do in aircraft is we simulate big airplane situations, but with an added realism of a little bit of G. So what we do is we build resilience. We get people used to dealing with upset situations, but with the third dimension added, which is the feel of the airplane under G. Slightly more than normal and slightly less than normal. So, of course, one of the disadvantages of doing in-airplane upset prevention recovery training is that we must do it on a light aircraft. It's simply not viable to do this sort of stuff in a big, large transport airplane. So we must be very careful indeed to make sure that we don't produce negative training results. Negative training involves, of course, the results of negative training. Anybody who's involved in the industry will realize, of course, that the biggest issue we face in light airplanes is that we use the rudder a lot in the normal sequence of events, but one doesn't do that in a large aircraft. So when we're doing upset prevention recovery training in light airplanes, I make sure that we don't emphasize rudder so much, and that if we do, we are simulating that the rudder is operating spoilers, which of course we don't have, and large airplanes do have. Most of the training that we do, in fact 2/3 of the training that we do in aircraft is done in the Cessna 172, where we emphasize angle of attack, G awareness, and also what autopilots can do when they go wrong. However, a very important part of the upset prevention recovery training that we do also is recovery from extreme unusual attitude situations. And for that, we use the T-67. We don't do aerobatics, we don't do spinning. We're not here to frighten people or to make them ill or to upset them in any way. But what we're here to do is to build resilience. And a really important part of resilience building, in my opinion, is calibrating people to what a big airplane can withstand. So we do 2G calibration runs. We do extreme attitude building slowly, but we get people used to recovering from, for example, large angles of bank and how to do that. And we can do that very, very usefully indeed in this airplane. And so everything we do on the UPRT in airplane training is coherent with what the students will learn in APS MCC and later on in their careers. So our aim is to provide training which is valid on larger aircraft. UPRT is probably the most valuable training that they will ever do in an airplane, because they're going to learn how to cope with stress and how to deal with the physical and the psychological effects of startle. And that's what we're doing.
My name is Captain Rich McElwraith. I am the Deputy Head of Afta's APS MCC programme and the Ryanair Cadet Coordinator. I'm current on Boeing 787 Dreamliner, 777 and 737 type aircraft with over 14,000 hours of flight time. I'm privileged to say I was one of the first Afta graduates back in 1995. From there, my journey as a first officer started with Ryanair on the Boeing 737-200 and progressing on to the Boeing 737-800 type aircraft. At Afta, we introduced environmental awareness to our APS MCC programme to enhance student awareness and knowledge of how we can contribute to reducing carbon emissions and noise pollution. We do this by introducing them to continuous descent approaches, burning less fuel and reducing carbon emissions. Also reducing noise pollution in noise-sensitive areas by limiting engine thrust and maintaining the aircraft in a low-drag configuration. We teach them to manage kinetic energy efficiently, to comply with noise restrictions and enhance passenger comfort and safety. Evidence-based training is a training and assessment method based on operational data that is characterised by developing and assessing the overall capability of a trainee across a range of core competencies rather than by measuring the performance in individual events or manoeuvres. At Afta, we use an app called V360, which is virtual reality in training. At Afta, we are the first flight training academy to use the V360 app. The benefits of virtual reality in training are safe, realistic and controlled environment to learn, perform training remotely, save time, money and the environment. It improves retention and recall, repeatable and controlled exposure to stressful situations, highly engaging training at scale, isolation from distractions, and also improve skills faster through experiential learning. As part of APS MCC training, we cover all weather operations, precautions for takeoff and approach, wind shear recovery procedures, runway lighting and marking, low-level wind shear alerting system, weather reports, wind shear recognition and avoidance, the effects of wind shear on an aircraft, associated terrain and ground structures, associated weather features including thunderstorms and microbursts. During APS MCC training, we cover jet upset and upset recovery recognition and techniques. This gives our students an insight into possible encounters they may be faced with throughout their career. Loss of airplane control in flight is a leading cause of fatalities in the commercial aviation industry. A variety of reasons exist for airplane upsets, but none is statistically significant. Reducing the number of reasons for upsets is a continual training process, and eliminating one reason will not necessarily reduce the number of loss of control accidents and fatalities. Additionally, many reasons for upsets are associated with the environment, in which case avoidance is the best solution, but it's not always possible. Therefore, pilots must have the necessary knowledge and skills to recover an upset airplane. Afta is a family environment, making instructor-student gradient minimal and approachable. When a student joins Afta, they're immersed into an airline-style environment. Although training, Afta's day-to-day operations integrate crew scheduling, flight operations and crew transport to allow the student to experience life almost identical to commercial airline operations, making the transition from cadet student training to commercial airline operations a comforting but confident one.